Relax.
For a few years now, I've been looking at the last game in the Batman Arkham series and I've been wondering, what did we do wrong? Because as of now, it's been 8 years since Arkham Knight and there's been a massive void left there ever since. And yeah, Rocksteady is off making another DC game with the Suicide Squad, but I don't know what to think of it so far. It has a battle pass, a shop, and it was delayed until 2024? I don't know, something here ain't smelling too good, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. But meanwhile, another title in the world of DC games kicked up its own multiplayer version of the Arkham series. Well, not actually a part of the series, but very similar gameplay-wise and starring some of Batman's many sidekicks. Gotham Knights is a game that couldn't even fully release before it was hit left and right with questions from the gaming community. Things like the world looking bleak and the performance being horrible at only 30 frames per second. And worst of all was the question surrounding the loot system, which is the easiest way to make any gamer rage and frustration from just hearing about it. And again, although this doesn't fall directly in line with the Arkham games, there were many expectations that this could potentially be a fun new take on the franchise. With DC fans starving for that beautiful combat system and the open world to return, the hype might have just been a little higher than the devs anticipated. Because what could have been an absolute slam dunk of a title isn't even mentioned much anymore. And that's for a few interesting reasons. We'll cover all of that in this video, including the most important question that everyone has. Is this truly the spiritual successor to the Arkham series that we've been looking for? But first, let's dig into the plot and see what it's about. Now, I don't know if this is a spoiler since it's pretty damn obvious, but spoiler alert, Batman is dead. With the main man himself being down for the count, obviously Gotham still needs protection from the countless villains who are dying to wreak havoc. Oh, and another spoiler alert, the Joker is not included.
I'm the Joker, baby!
But that's where our main protagonists, Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, and Red Hood come into play. We follow their story as they work to solve mysteries, destroy crime syndicates, and to work to figure out the truth behind the death of the Dark Knight himself. But something I wasn't too ecstatic about is that the story doesn't change much based on who you play as. So for example, you may choose to start off your playthrough with Nightwing, and if you do, then the story around you will slightly mold to match with Nightwing. And it's not like the villains you fight or the missions that you do are going to change much, but the way that characters talk to you and even who you communicate with back at the home base will be different. So personally, I do recommend that you stick with one of the 4 heroes through your whole playthrough, because if you do swap between the characters, you won't get the full depth of the story mode, because each character has a different perspective on the overall story, and there's many different points of dialogue that will differ based on who you are.
I heard about you. The latest boy wonder.
Because I played through the game mostly as Red Hood, and he would talk a lot about his experiences with the Lazarus pits, dying and being revived again, meaning that a huge chunk of the dialogue between Red Hood and other characters just revolved around the plot of Jason Todd.
I mean, if you want some advice on being dead, I got you covered.
So if I were to play as Red Hood for half of the game and then decide halfway through, hey, let me just switch to playing as Robin instead, then I would get totally different vibes and dialogue for the later half of that playthrough. I would start seeing it from Robin's view and not understand how Red Hood would have seen it through to the end. And that is something that could push you to play the game multiple times if you really care about it, but ultimately I don't think it's worth all that. The whole plot is designed so that it plays out the same no matter who you play as, but the dialogue between the characters can slightly alter. Even when you contact your home base, which is the Belfry, you won't even say the names of the characters there because even that can change. So even if the person you're playing as is talking to a specific character at the home base, they won't actually say their name, they'll just say Belfry.
Belfry, the freaks have the theater entrance is locked up tight.
And that also helps when you're doing co-op because again, you're going to have to talk to somebody, but it's not going to be the person that you're doing co-op with. So again, it'll just be Belfry. But because I played as Red Hood most of the time, I heard a lot more discussions revolving around his older tendencies to just straight up kill bad guys. And speaking of bad guys, there is a few ways you can take them all out just based on who you play as. has. And I can't speak for everyone's gameplay much since I only played as the other 3 characters for maybe one mission before switching back to Red Hood, but my experience of playing as Red Hood is that he's a pretty powerful character. At first I thought he would just be shooting people and that's about it, but it's not just about using his guns. It's about being able to overpower your enemies with strong attacks, swapping back and forth between each enemy that you come across as they jump you. And you'll counter enemy attacks in a way that's similar to the Arkham series, but not as magnetic, if that makes any sense. Because Batman would normally snap towards the enemies he counters and dodges, while this is more loose in comparison. And that's probably because it's accounting for the multiplayer too, but it's just not as satisfying. You're given these special attacks called momentum abilities, and they use each character's main traits to pull off some signature moves. Utilizing your momentum abilities to their highest efficiency ended up being a key to success for me, because the one I used the most was this turret that you unlock later on, and if you just put this thing down, it will do all the hard work for you. So if you're going into a mission and you're like, damn, I am being overrun with all these enemies, just throw this turret down and you're pretty much good. It wipes out your enemies and gives you a chance to run around and heal, focus on other targets, or just let loose with some bullets. But in between story missions, you'll have the open world of Gotham to explore and fight crimes. Now the devs stated that this will be a more immersive open world experience, but I'm just wondering who their crack dealer is because I don't see anything immersive about this. First off, everything looks so boring and bland. And I know that in most Batman media, you expect it to be nighttime and for everything to just be dark and dreary. Even in a game like Arkham Knight, they make use of lighting and visual effects to bring out the colors in each darkened area, meaning that certain places felt distinct and had a vibe to them even if it's just dark and rainy outside. Not to mention there's not much immersion here because there isn't much to do besides fight crimes, which end up being super repetitive and oftentimes confusing. Like, they'll tell me I need to fight members of Harley Quinn's gang to progress the story, but they don't give me any markers to let me know where to find them. So you'll have to search the map on your own and figure all that out by yourself. And I know this is somewhat of a detective game, but making something like finding your next quest into a mystery is some bullshit. Oh, and of course, what is an open world game without the methods that they give you to travel across it? Here you have a few options, but each one comes with a bit of a nuisance on its own. Like first being able to use Batman's tricked out bike to cruise through Gotham in style. However, driving around in the Batcycle feels extremely lame compared to what I expected. First off, it's not nearly as fast as I wanted it to be, because I want to be zooming through these streets looking for asses to clap, but instead it feels like it's just too bulky. Which is very ironic because for something that looks like a mini tank, there's just no collision physics whenever you ram into cars on the street. Even when you're faced with the weakest car in comparison, this thing won't move it 1 inch. It takes away from that badass feeling that's normally associated with Batman's arsenal of cars and bikes. But I will say that it handles turns pretty well. Unless of course you're going on a ramp and you're already airborne. Then you can also move around using the rooftops of Gotham to your advantage. Zipping around the city using your grapple hook feels like the dollar store version of Spider-Man PS4.
Needs to say I keep a check. She was all bad, never thought.
It's not the most efficient way of getting around, but it's not a terrible option when you don't feel like dropping down a street level and calling the Batcycle. And I defaulted to using this a lot when most of my missions were only a few hundred feet away. But there is also fast travel that helps you get across the farther distances. With the only problem being that unlocking that fast travel system being some absolute tomfoolery. So you can't just walk, zipline, or drive around to unlock these fast travel points like in most other open world games. No, instead it's locked behind this set of missions that require you to scan drones all around Gotham. It doesn't sound too bad, but it gets annoying really quick. The wingsuit that you unlock to fast travel is part of a series of quests where you'll need to trick drones into not seeing you as a threat and then shooting you down. And these drones fly around and you need to get close enough to scan them and deactivate their defenses. However, if the drones have a force field, then you need to wait until they stop at a docking station before you can disable them. And what that turns into is a waiting game where you go from point to point trying to catch them at the dock. And if you just so happen to miss them by even just a second, well, then that's just too damn bad. Prepare to sit there for another 3 minutes waiting for it to do its rounds yet again. But something that I wasn't looking forward to were the investigation sections that make you think. They make use of their detective skills, so you'll have a lot of clues to scan in every investigation. That includes these mini puzzles that make you figure out what the cause of a crime was using the evidence and some context clues. Personally, I always preferred the combat and characters in the Arkham series, but honestly, the puzzles and investigations were a bit much. Especially when you're given that huge ass list of Riddler puzzles to do that take absolutely forever. Luckily, the investigations here aren't as monotonous, but god are they just boring. And again, I compare this game a lot to the Arkham series because that's the closest thing I can think of when matching it up gameplay wise. Obviously, it's not exactly the same because of the multiplayer, the progression system, and the gear system, but the combat, the parrying, and even the investigations did remind me heavily of the Arkham games. Actually, it made me want to go back to play that series even more. And the next part is a good reason as to why I feel that way. What killed Gotham Knights for me is that it edges too close to being a game as a service and doesn't do enough to make one full solid experience that feels like a complete package. Because when I finished this, I just wanted to feel like it was done with so I can move on to something else. But the devs just had to slip in something like, hey, maybe you should go back and do some missions because have you even seen the legendary gear yet? Yes, the usual thing that you expect from many other grind-heavy looter titles. The gear system is something that I didn't really get too deeply into because it's just not important. I didn't really feel the need to go back and grind for new gear or to do extra missions in order to unlock something better, because after each mission you'll be able to craft new gear and that new gear is probably going to be exactly what you need. I slapped on the modifications and made it as powerful as I possibly could, and I didn't really feel any problems. There are gear that give you extra abilities like being able to freeze your opponents or to be able to stun them, but again, that's only for people who are really invested in this and who want to play this for a very long time, which again is just not what I'm into. And since release, they did give us new content where you can play online and do extra missions, but from what I've been hearing from people, after a while that mode completely kills any type of motivation to play the game. Because you'll be constantly grinding through levels and just defeating enemies, getting new gear, and after a while it's just like, hey, I mean, what do I even need this for? So no, I have not unlocked any legendary gear from just playing the plot. I've seen it mentioned in the hint section, and I've seen people online discussing different legendary builds, but I've never seen a reason to care much for it so far. And it's possible they plan to add an expansion later on with even more villains like Scarecrow or Poison Ivy, but I think I'll pass on that. Because to me, this experience is enough. If they did add DLC or a season pass to add new content, there'd have to be something in there that's really worth going back to, but otherwise I think this is just a done bun. And that's especially if they double down on the gear system and add raids or quests meant only for grinding levels and loot. Because we clearly do not need another one of those games. It's pretty clear to me that the developers had this idea to create a gameplay flow that revolved around constantly pushing yourself to unlock new gear and unlocking new weapons for each character. Somewhat like Destiny and how it has a gameplay loop that has you come back, fight new bosses, explore new areas, and do new raids, just so you can unlock the new weapons, the new gear, and whatever else is going to help you along your journey. But for a game like that, it makes sense because you can kind of expect for there to always be something new to do. When you have a dedicated fan base and a feedback loop where people constantly want to come back and play with one another, then you have this thing that constantly grows on its own even if you don't have new content for it. And then when you do have new content, that's when everybody comes back and hops right back on the hype train. But where Gotham Knights fails is that I don't care to play this over and over and over again. I didn't even care to play this 4 times to see every perspective for all the main characters. Once I finished it once, I was done and satisfied. I beat all the bosses, I solved as many crimes as I possibly cared to do, and do I really want to go back and play this in co-op mode? Not really. Do I even want to play the free multiplayer update? Again, not really. And of course for you that might be a different answer, but for me, I just think this experience is finished and there's not much of a gameplay loop left. However, it is clear that that's not what they intended, and that's kinda sad. Do you love the co-op? Does it scratch your itch for more Batman Arkham content? I would love to hear all your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you all in the next video.